Thanks, James, for starting to present in English, because I certainly don't know how to speak in Bahasa. So thank you very much for Susanto and for our very good friend Safril for giving me opportunity to come here. This is my second time to come to this lovely conference, and I really enjoy coming here. It's a really, really unique experience. I am the CTO for BMC Software for the region, and I also run the innovation team for the BMC Software. In these two roles, I get a chance to talk to hundreds of CIOs around the world. And what I'm going to talk about today for next 20 minutes is the concerns that CIOs around the world have shared with me and what they see as the challenges for today and in the future. But before we look at the present and future, let's look at where we came from. If you look at the CIOs and where our IT has come from, we have come long ways. We had no standardization, no virtualization, no processes. And from that, in last 10 to 15 years, we have made great progress. Many companies now use virtualization. Many companies have started using automation. Many companies have used ITIL standards and standard processes. So we made great progress in IT service management, but that's not enough. And why is that not enough? That's not enough because there are lots of challenges that are coming up in the present that are as equally daunting. And many speakers before me have actually touched upon these trends, whether it's mobility, cost, agility, etc. So I'll actually quickly go through it, not dwell on it too much. Since this morning, we have been talking about mobility, the explosion of mobile devices, how number of mobile devices are exceeding the person, etc. But the second challenge is costs. Even today, 2/3 of the IT budgets is still being spent on keeping the lights on. The third challenge is agility. 5 years ago, the software process, the ability to take an idea, write software for it and release it, it used to take 3 months. And in today's days, the requirement is that it needs to be done in 2 weeks or less. Many companies around the world are looking at how they can actually release software very, very quickly. So agility is becoming a big challenge for all CIOs. We looked at how the data is exploding. Speakers before me have touched upon this, that the amount of data in this world is increasing exponentially. And then cloud. The evolution of cloud has really changed the expectations of people when it comes to the services that they consume. But it's not just me saying this. If you look at the top 10 Gartner priorities, right? And many of you are familiar with this list of priorities that gets published every year. If you look at the 2013 top 10 technology priorities, a very interesting thing is starting to emerge. If you look at the top 4 priorities, they're actually nothing but SMAC, the social, analytics, mobility, and cloud. Social, mobility, analytics, and cloud. These are the 4 things that are on top of CIOs' minds, and they have literally found its way on the top of their list in this year's Gartner top 10 priorities. Those were the technology priorities. Now look at the business priorities. If you look at the top 10 business priorities for 2013, there's an interesting picture that comes up. In those top 10 priorities, there are half of them which are kind of traditional or old priorities. So delivering operational results, reducing enterprise cost, these are some of the this is much better. These are some of the priorities that have been there on CIO's list for many, many years, right? And these I call as old priorities. Then if you look at the other half of the priorities are what I called as the new priorities. And these are the ones that talk about the increasing enterprise growth. It talks about attracting and retaining new customers. So if you look at the CIO priorities, half of the priorities are actually old priorities, which are what we call bottom line priorities, reducing your bottom lines. and half of the priorities are what we call top-line priorities. These are the priorities where the CIOs are looking to increase the business. They're looking to increase the revenue. They're looking to create new business opportunities. So this is where we are in the present when you look at the CIO priorities. But there's also a very interesting phenomenon that is going on in current world. So if you look at some things that are happening today, there is something that happened on June 23rd, and some of you may have heard about this. A biggest bank in the world called ICBC Bank actually got a disruption. And that bank, basically all ATMs stopped working in China. The online banking went down. Millions of customers were affected. It spread from Shanghai to Beijing to Wuhan to all the major Chinese cities. And do you know what was the problem? The problem that took down the entire banking was a couple of software bugs that came in when a software was upgraded from a previous version to the latest version. Now, why am I giving this example? I'm giving this example is because with all these priorities that we have on top of CIOs' minds, CIOs are still having to worry about simple things like software upgrades. So if you look at today's CIO's dashboard, it still looks like very complex. It looks like flying a plane. There are hundreds of levers, hundreds of buttons, and you still need to know how to drive, how to fly the plane. There's things like compliance, policy, governance, no vendor lock-in, big data. All of these, along with all the simple things like software upgrades, are still making IT very, very complex to run. And even today, it requires an expert level knowledge for a CIO to run IT. This is the situation in the present. And while we have been talking about this CIO and having to deal with all this complexity, what about the end user? The end user experience has been completely ignored. I'm sure many of you will have this kind of situation in your office where you have a printer sitting there with a bunch of these instructions around it, and you as an end user is expected to find out how to deal with all this complexity. So the end user experience has been completely ignored for last 10, 15 years because we have been focusing on the back end of IT. And that is becoming more of a challenge for CIOs now, more so than ever. And why is that? That's because the end user expectations are also changing. If you look at the smart generation, like me, if you have kids who were born 2007 or beyond, they're called smart generation kids. And as number of the workforce in your organization starts to become the smart generation kids, their expectations from IT is very, very different. Today, at my home, I have 10 connected devices. I have 3 tablets, 4 smartphones, 2 laptops, a network-attached storage. All of it is connected on Wi-Fi. If I need to get an application, I simply go to the App Store, I download an application, I'm up and running. I know many of you are also familiar with that. When I go to workplace, when I go to an enterprise, I will go into an organization, if I don't get a similar experience, I start to complain. I start to complain, why can't I have easy access to millions of applications that are so necessary for my productivity? So these are the expectations that are changing on the end user that are slowly starting to find its way into an organization. And CIOs around the world are having to deal with this changing expectations of the end user. Take another example of social collaboration. In our personal lives, we have personal social networks on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And when we have a problem, our first instinct is to go on Facebook and ask our peer network. Because we trust our peer network. And people are saying, how can I have access to the same social networks at work so I can work more efficiently? These are the expectations that are trickling from a personal experience into a corporate experience. Has this happened to you? I know it has happened to me when I wanted to take my Apple MacBook into work because that's what I like to work on, but my organization did not support it. So I had to actually take it in anyways. We have been talking about bring your own device, but it's not just bring your own device. It's bring your own applications. It's bring your own identity. Many people around the world like to bring their own applications to work. They use different presentation software. They use different softwares that they want to actually use at work. Most of us have different identities. I have a Facebook identity. I have a Twitter identity. I have a LinkedIn profile. I also have my corporate identity. And I'm not talking about single sign-on. I'm actually talking about keeping these identities separate. I don't want my Facebook pictures to be visible on my corporate network. I don't want my LinkedIn profile, anytime I update my LinkedIn profile, my manager gets an email. So I'm actually looking to keep these identities separate. And I want to keep these identities, I want to bring them into organization. I want to be able to have access to all these identities from work. Now, if you're a CIO, in the past, you would just turn off the Facebook, you would turn off Gmail, you would turn off all these things that are not allowed to be used in our organization. But today, many people are actually leaving their jobs because they don't have access to these systems from work. So CIOs around the world are having to support all these different applications and services at work. So this bring your own identity into a corporate environment is becoming very important. Shadow IT, IT friction is on the rise. IT friction happens when you can't get the service you want and you lose productivity. And as much as 20% of IT productivity is being lost because of IT friction. So if you look at the present, it's really a balancing act for CIOs. You have to manage extremely tactical tasks like the software upgrades, simple software upgrades, to some really strategic initiatives. You still have to keep the lights on. 2/3 of your budget still goes in keeping the lights on. That means you only have 1/3 budget left to do any of the interesting things. And you still have to adapt to the new technology trends that are constantly coming up. Then there are changing expectations like BYOD, bring your own applications, bring your own identity. And on top of it, CIOs have been asked to innovate. So that's what the present looks like for CIOs. Now let's quickly look at what does the future look like, right? So the future for CIO, the role of CIO, it's all about managing this balancing act as well as increasing the revenues for your business, creating new business opportunities for your organization. And to illustrate that, I'm just going to use one quick example. This example is of a pharmaceutical company called Sanofi. Sanofi is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, in top 5 pharmaceutical companies. And they're well known for their diabetes equipment. So they make these diabetes instruments that allow you to take your blood sample and to figure out whether you have what your blood sugar levels are. Now recently, they launched a new product called IVG Star. This product allows the end user, people like us, to take our own blood sample using that small device that you see. That small device then fits into your iPhone and then communicates back to a central cloud-based service. Now, why am I using this example? The reason I'm using this example is because if you think about the CIO of Sanofi, earlier they used to sell these equipments to doctors and hospitals and clinical places. So they may be selling, let's say, 5,000 of devices. Now with this device, which anybody can buy, millions of end users are actually testing their own blood, connecting it to their iPhone, uploading it to the web. So suddenly the CIO of Sanofi instead of supporting 5,000 end users of their product, is expected to support millions of users. And all of these millions of users are now Sanofi IT users. But in the process, the Sanofi CIO has created a huge new market for Sanofi and the new ways of generating revenues. So this is an example of how an innovative CIO can not get constrained by their existing constraints and existing limitations and can create new business opportunities. And there are many, many such examples of smart CIOs creating new business opportunities for their businesses. So last few slides, how can BMC software help CIOs? So we have been the first ones to actually recognize that this is the new era of IT. This is no longer old IT, no longer old IT management. So you still have to worry about optimizing the value and cost of your existing services because your 2/3 of your budget is still being used to keeping the lights on. The second, you have to innovate much, much faster. If you take 3 months to innovate and release something, your competition is going to overtake you. So you have to innovate at a faster rate. And we have been investing a lot in helping companies innovate faster. Then you have to deliver a great user experience to enterprise consumers. The enterprise consumers have been largely ignored so far, but now we have to start paying attention to that. So if you look at it from your back end, you have to create a flexible IT resources. So utilizing cloud, you can actually go much beyond your physical walls of your data center. You should be able to design and develop and deploy your applications very, very fast. To go from an idea, to develop that idea, to test that idea, to release that idea to the customers. That whole cycle, if you can shorten it, it will actually help your business tremendously. And then self-service IT anywhere, anytime. Making services fast, flexible, and personal. That is how BMC software helps CIOs around the world to actually take on these challenges that they are facing. So if you look at it, CIOs are at an interesting juncture. If you stick to your old way of doing it, the word CIO might just mean career is over. But the smart CIOs are actually taking the CIO role and taking that into what I call it CI3O. And this CI3O means the Chief Intelligence, Innovation, and Information Officer. So the CIOs who recognize that they need to change their role to CI3O, those are the ones who will survive, and the others will, unfortunately, career is over, is what CIO will mean for them. So I thank you very much. And one last thing before I go, there's a very interesting app. There is a very interesting application that we have developed, which is available to all of you. You should have received download instructions for this app. This app works on iPhone as well as Android. Please download this app, and the login instructions are there. And this app is designed for you to take the maximum benefit of this conference. So you will find some agenda, you will find some interesting documents, and you will able to interact with this application, which is really geared towards changing the way end users work with IT. So have fun with it, and there are some interesting prizes if you download that application and you work with it. If you don't know how to download it, please see us at the BMC software booth. And thanks a lot, and have a nice day.
Big applause for Mr. Kelkar from BMC Software. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Kelkar.